So my name is Julia Thie, and I'm an acupuncturist in Colonial Heights, Tennessee, which is in between Johnson City and Kingsport. And I am in the perfect spot. I have patients who come from all the states in the area. And I've been in practice for about 10 years. And I moved here from Southern California, where I got my education. I went to a 4-year private college for traditional Chinese medicine called Yosan University in Santa Monica. So it kind of full circle that I'm back here in Southern Appalachia after going around living in Connecticut, Massachusetts, California, and then I ended up back here, and it's been very interesting to see how my roots and growing up kind of in this climate really kind of matched, that I could find myself bringing such a foreign topic to the people of Appalachia, and how they could hear me, I think, is because I was from here. So you ready?
Sure.
Okay. What I look for in cupping is muscle bundling, where the muscles are bundled, and I put what used to be a fire cup, where you would light fire and remove the oxygen from the cup and really quickly put it on the skin. I have upgraded to the pneumatic cup, and this draws the skin and muscle up into the cup with suction, and it breaks the capillary bed and stimulates blood circulation to the bundled muscle. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Alright, so I just draw that up right into the cup. And it burns a little, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a burny feeling, but it doesn't get any worse, and it usually fades away a little. And we'll go right here. I leave them on for about 3 to 5 minutes, and depending upon how much you need it will determine how dark these marks get. And you see how this one's darker than this one. I think you needed that one a little bit more. And oh yeah, where's that spot you have?
Mm-hmm.
Right in here. I'm going to do both of these. So let's do this one first. Ooh yeah. Hurts so good. He has some pain that radiates down this arm. So if I can increase the blood supply to the muscle, it can help flush out some of the inflammatory compounds blocking the nerve supply down that arm. That's the plan. You see how dark that is? How does it feel?
That's same as always. Not too uncomfortable.
Okay, I'm going to do one more. This point's called Ding Xuan. It's really the thoracic outlet where all the nerves that go to the arms branch off there. Well, not all, but an important bundle. Okay, so we leave that to cook for just a moment. Okay, I'm going to take these off. So I just release the valve on the top, and it lets the suction let go. I call them octopus hickeys because it looks like you've been attacked by an octopus. How does that feel?
Great.
when I take the cups off, there's sort of a rush of blood that you feel. It usually is pretty great. So why don't I go ahead and put some needles in the back? So usually I treat either the front or the back depending upon the condition. But let's say if he had had back surgery at some point, he probably would have some scar tissue, and I would want to do some points directly on the area where the scar tissue is. A lot of times I'll needle in a distal location away from the area of pain, but this, if we'll pretend that if he had scar tissue in the spine, I'll put some needles on the sides of the spine. Let's see here. Let's use these. These are Japanese needles. I also use Taiwanese needles. I'm actually out of stock right now. There we go. And this rubbing alcohol, which technically there is so little of a sanitation issue with acupuncture because the needles aren't hollow. Yes, they break the skin, but they don't put anything in and they don't draw anything out. I'm avoiding large blood vessels and nerves, so really there is less risk with acupuncture than there is with a lot of other things that we do. All right, so let me just kind of feel the spinous processes, and then okay, a little tight in there. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The trick to making it not hurt is to make the skin very taut. And so I kind of hold the skin apart. Good. Each spinous process, the blood and nerves that come from the spine correspond to a different organ. So really you can treat the whole body from the back. You can treat the whole body from any body part. But if we're talking about the spine, areas of heart and lung are through here, areas of digestion and diaphragm, and then we get into some of the deeper organs, the spleen, the liver, gallbladder. Then down in here we get into large intestine, kidneys, and reproductive organs. And this channel that runs down the sides of the spine is the urinary bladder channel. And it actually has two runs that goes down. One, we have measurements called sun, and it's a certain distance between the scapula and the spine, runs down through there. And then the outer is also used. Some people feel that the emotional part of each organ lies in what we call the outer shoe or the outer bladder channel. There's argument on that. There's plenty of argument within the acupuncture community in what's what. Let's do another. Here we go. There's another little bit of congestion. So I'm going to do the inner shoe. Each of these has a meridian name and number. So these are all numbered down the channel. So this would, let's say, be urinary bladder 22. There's 67 in the entire channel. It starts at the inside of the eye, goes up the top of the head, and it actually ends at the pinky toe on the outside. That's a pretty powerful point there on the end of the pinky toe. I don't have to put a needle in it. There are other things we can do to acupuncture points to stimulate them. Needling's just one of them. There. Now, since I know he's been doing a lot of construction, I'm sure he's really tight working with his arms up over his head. So I'm going to do a couple of his trapezius points, which aren't so much about putting the needle in a particular point, but we can do what are called sinew vessels, which are more points for the muscles. The depth of the needle is anywhere between, it could be a 1/16 of an inch to 2 inches. Depending upon the location, but what I also have discovered is that it also depends on where the person's energy is at the surface. Some people it's right at the top, some people it's way down deep, and it usually matches their personality, which is very interesting. There we go. Good. You feel that? Let me move your ponytail out of the way. Now these needles have guide tubes. I don't have to use these. I like using them on the back, probably more out of habit than anything else. But they help you break the surface very cleanly. If I was to do freehand, I might use one of these. Most of my freehand needles have a copper filiform wrapped around, where these have a plastic. And the freeform pin, let's just swab. Let's do your outer shoe of your heart. Let's do that. Right there. That's the old school way. My school, we had to learn how to do that. They wouldn't let us graduate unless we could do it without the tube. You good?
Yeah.
Good. See, and you get this little inflammatory response. And this is pretty interesting, that what acupuncture does is help the body finish its inflammation process quicker. So rather than just stop inflammation, it actually speeds it up so that you can get to the end result of inflammation, which is tissue healing. So if that's what we're headed for, if inflammation has a reason for being there, we actually promote it. So there is a chance after acupuncture, especially in a local acupuncture treatment, when I put the pins where the problem is, that there will be some discomfort that night, part of the inflammatory process. And then the next day, you feel great. Acupuncture can work instantly. For example, you have a pain in your elbow, and I could put a needle in distantly and it would feel better immediately in some cases. I don't need to leave the needle in any longer than that. What happens is there is a process when you leave the needles in. You have a couple things going on. There's this magic number of 22 minutes. After about 22 minutes, the body takes a deep breath and it becomes more internal medicine, where you start getting more of the chemical shift. It gives the body just a little bit more time and reinforcement to get into an endorphin cycle, that runner's high. That's why most of the time after acupuncture, we wear a silly grin because it just feels so good, and it's actually the naturally occurring hormones and neurotransmitters that do reduce pain, help with all the processes of bringing your body back to how it's supposed to be. So I leave the needles in for anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. Sometimes when someone is just wound up really tightly, let's say they're under a lot of stress, but they're relatively healthy, then I'll leave the needles in for a good long time to give them a chance also to be away from the cell phone, in a quiet room with quiet music, and just give themselves a chance to just have a breath away from life. And the reason why I made the point of whether they're healthy or not is that a person who's very weak doesn't need to have the needles in as long as a person who has a lot of what we would call chi, a lot of energy. Then they can afford to sit for a longer period of time. But say somebody who is going through chemotherapy, or a senior citizen, or even pediatrics. In pediatrics, I don't have to leave the needles in but 8 to 12 minutes, and the job is plenty done. If you leave them in too long in a weak person, it just makes them tired. Because I am not putting any chemicals into their bodies. It's their own pharmacy. They're doing all the work. I put the needles in, then they go to work. So it requires energy to move energy. So that's why if you don't have a lot of energy and you leave the needles in for a long time, you're tired because you've been working hard.
All right. Well, while he works.
You working?
Yeah. Kind of passing out. Like fell asleep.
He's got his heat lamp on his feet.
All righty.
Talking about acupuncture a little bit, I feel that every acupuncturist has a little bit of a different viewpoint about how acupuncture works, and how they choose their acupuncture points, I should say. That you can get a room full of acupuncturists together and the same patient, and you would have as many different treatment plans and protocols as you do acupuncturists, because we all work within the tools that we feel work for us. So there are several different systems of acupuncture, but we mainly agree on the position of the 12 main meridians. And it's one of the reasons why standardizing acupuncture is so difficult, because it is an art form. And the more you try and say, well, my way is the way, this is the standard of care, all the other folks who have a different way of doing it are out in the cold. Or they just keep doing it. So what we have here is a diagram of the 12 main meridians. Of course, anywhere you acupuncture on the body, or even in the body's energy field, which is a very interesting thing, for example, with people with amputee, people with limbs removed who have acupuncture, people will place acupuncture needles where the leg would be if they're having phantom pain, with result, which is just fascinating to me. So this is basically not so much spots of energy, but concentrations within the field. So if this whole thing is a field of energy, this is a way to explain the direction that it flows. I think of it like liquid electricity, because it's a little bit energy and a little bit fluid, at least when it gets under the skin. So the layer, the depth at which most of this happens is actually, in biology, it would be called the superficial fascia, is where I feel most of this energy resides. It's above the muscle layer, below the skin layer, and the more that we look at the superficial fascia, it's really where the brain of the body lies. I could never understand why I could put a needle in someone's knee and affect their elbow. That I knew it happened, I knew it worked, but I couldn't really say, well, I guess it goes up to the brain and then the brain figures it out and it goes down here to the elbow. But now that I've discovered the superficial fascia, I think that the body communicates with itself all the time. And so I can put, let's say, back in 3,000 years ago, and I had to treat a concubine of the emperor. And all that I was allowed to see was her hand. That's all they would let me touch. I could do that. You could treat the whole body with your pinky finger because of the idea of the holographic body, that the macrocosm within the microcosm, as within, so without. The whole idea that the DNA holds the key code for the whole body. So whatever paradigm you want to use, I think they call it Inra's web in Buddhism. The idea that every cell has your whole body in it. So there's no reason why we can't treat the whole body with any subsection. So my style of acupuncture uses a lot of distal needles. So if a person had trouble in like what we were talking about earlier in the lower back, this bladder meridian, remember I said there were 2 lines of energy that run down each side of the spine. Well, there they are. And let's say there was congestion here, because so often there is. We sit a lot, and these vertebrae get really compressed, and we would call that blood stagnation. You get scar tissue or some sort of adhesions in the muscles, and that's blood stagnation. So in acupuncture, we would diagnose that as blood stagnation in either a sinew vessel or the primary meridian, so in the maybe bladder and gallbladder. And so somebody comes and lays on my table for the first time and I say, you have congestion in your urinary bladder channel. You immediately think, oh my gosh, my bladder. But these are named after organs because there's a very intricate pattern of connection to the internal organs that takes a long time to explain, but that if we are just working with the musculoskeletal and internal organ connection, that by manipulating a meridian, you can manipulate both the host and a corresponding meridian that corresponds to it through a variety of theories. There's 5 different systems for that. So there are some major areas of common pain. We all know about the crick in the neck, the sore low back. What would be another good one? A headache, a migraine. So we choose these 3, and you can say there are yin organs and there are yang organs, and yin meridians and yang meridians. And so yin and yang are relative to each other. There is not one without the other. They're a shadow of a reflection of the other. So on the body, if you were picking rice in a field and you were leaned over, wherever the sun would hit you are your yang organs or bright organs, that where the sun shines are more the energy. Where the shadow would be are your yin organs, so they're more on the front of the body and the insides of the arms and legs. So we use them for different reasons, but most of the time pain that is caused by either a local muscle problem or an internal disruption, like let's say you're not digesting your food very well and you have a headache, that can all happen through this system of meridians. So some of the bigger ones are the yang meridians, and they run all over the side of the head and down the side of the body, down the side of the leg, the sciatic nerve. And so a question I get is, oh, well, aren't meridians just the nerves? No, they sometimes fall in line with nerves, but they will go away from nerves and come back to them. So quite often, let's say a sciatic nerve running down the leg, if it's in pain, yes, you have some sort of disruption on the gallbladder channel, then that is on the same area, but it's not really the nerves treating nerves. So I'm not putting a needle in your nerve. That hurts. Migraines are also gallbladder most of the time, and they are the side of the head. So it covers a lot of ground. Quite often, let's say, for example, a condition like fibromyalgia. If I go and do a talk for a fibromyalgia support group, I'll bring a diagram like this because all the trigger points or the diagnosis points for fibromyalgia all fall on some of the major yang channels and points. So what else?
It's great.
Good.
Excellent.
Hi.
Hello.
It's about that time.
That's good.
You're about ready?
About ready.
Okay. Now you can see on his back, these aren't red anymore. They were red before. These got the reddest, and they're kind of still going through their process. Sometimes the skin goes back to clear, and you know it's kind of run through the whole inflammatory process. So I'm just going to take his pins out. See, it doesn't even bleed. I mean, sometimes it will if somebody's really hot-natured and their capillaries are right up close to the surface, or even people on blood thinners. That's often a question I get asked. It's perfectly safe. Rarely even leaves any bruise of any kind. Sometimes you'll get an acupuncture bruise. They can be very colorful. We try not to do that. Now, the topical products that I use on top of the skin, because I know he has a little bit of injury down the arm, I'm going to use a little of my white flower oil, which is a cooling, mentholated. Would you like that?
Sure.
Okay. And it does have, it's very similar to Vicks Vapor Rub without the petroleum jelly. I put a little on cotton ball. It's also great for the sinuses. So we could, being face down usually fills up your sinuses, so just kind of run that down. Okay. And sometimes I'll do just a little bit of acupressure after the fact, and just icing on the cake. This is my favorite. Is this your favorite?
Mm.
Now this is the Shiatsu Anma. It's all about the sound. You get the sound right, you know you're doing it right. Et voilà. Okay.
Okay.
You ready? You
Sure.
sell those? Spider webs are actually a Chinese herb. They're good for burns, skin wounds. I never use them. Wasps' nests too. Okay, welcome to my apothecary. I have been practicing herbal medicine as long as I can remember. I think all of us are herbalists to one degree or another. We all eat food, so we're all herbalists. The Chinese differentiate herbs a little differently. There is animal, mineral, vegetable. They are all in the herbal kingdom. So technically what is an herb is a very broad picture. The more therapeutic it becomes, the less we desire it. What we would prefer is foods that are tonic in nature and herbs that are tonic in nature that just help you to function the way you're supposed to. When you get sick, you introduce herbs that are stronger and things that actually change you, and that is something that you do for periods of time. There's also seasonal things that you do that help through different seasons, like a spring cleanse. There's a lot of Appalachian medicine around here, and the old clean the blood in the spring. A lot of my older patients tell me about their mamas told them about cleaning their blood, and that's what we do in any culture. So a lot of the herbal medicine in all cultures is usually handed down at the kitchen table. And so for me, my mother was a master gardener, and she always had an herb garden, and I would always be sitting beside her while she was working in the garden, and I'd eat the dirt, and I just always felt very comfortable around plants, and I felt that it was a no-brainer that that herbs were here to help us, that they work with us, that it's the natural, we help them, they help us. And so there's a relationship with plants that was developed for me over time because I was fortunate enough to live in communities that were very wooded, and growing up around a lot of forests and manicured herb gardens that people tend to. So I took the herbalism to another step than my mother used a lot in cooking and things like that, and decorating. And I stepped it to the medicinal value of herbs and how to use them topically, internally, even spiritually. You know, having the plants that you have around you affecting your senses, which affect your state of mind. So essential oils, flower essences, the realm of herbal medicine has no end. There have been plants as long as there have been humans, maybe longer, and there's been a lot of research in herbs as far as looking at them through a lot of different viewpoints. We can look at them like drugs. We can look at them as sentient beings and everything in between. So I like to stand in the middle of the road a lot and look at all sides. And so I try and look at plants the same way, that I respect research, although I feel a lot of the herbal research that has been done is quite often not done by an herbalist. So their viewpoint is skewed. They have studied the wrong plants and then posted the study, and it wasn't even the plant. So there are certain herbal research rules that I look for if I'm going to feel that a research study is valid. So I respect that, and there are a lot of people out there really trying to understand herbs from a scientific viewpoint, with the other foot in the traditional, you pick it at a certain time of year, you grow it, even gardening by the moon signs. And there are several companies that I use that do honor the traditional practice of growing, organic farming, and sustainable agriculture, who also will take a spectroscope and they'll pick a plant, run it through the spectroscope, and decide if it's the best time to pick. Are the chemicals we're looking for at their optimum right now? And it's just such a beautiful melding of science and tradition that's what I try and stick with. So the herbs that I have here are a mixture of Chinese and Western, which really Western herbs are a culmination of the Greek herbs that came through England. So a lot of our Eastern European heritage shows itself here. We brought a lot of herbs over with us, and then we met up with the Cherokees and all the other Native American tribes and their rich traditions that are older than time, and we blended them together. Now that we have this global culture, we have planetary herbology. So we have herbs from India and from Vietnam, from all the different cultures. Every one of them are going to have an herbal history. And so there's so much to offer. It's overwhelming, and it almost makes me decide to come back to what grows in my backyard, because I know I'm provided with everything I need. So I just look in my backyard, and there is medicine there to heal almost any ill I have. I've worked in a lot of different herbal environments. I've worked at health food stores, and I worked at 2 herb shops that were very different in the same town. One was a Taoist tonic shop, and the other was a traditional Chinese medical herb shop. And they both had huge apothecaries, 30 times bigger than this one. And I loved working in them because I would come home and I would just smell like herbs. But it was the local pharmacies for all the acupuncturists or herbalists in the area. They would fax in the prescription for the patient. We would make the formula, wrap it in paper, little paper containers, and the patient would come and pick up their prescription. And that worked really well. But by working in those 2 different herb shops with a little bit of a different viewpoint, one was more medicinal herbs, one was more tonic, I got to see how they both have a reason for being here, and they both, you can't treat everything with a tonic, and you can't treat everything with medicinal herbs. So it was really nice, and I learned a lot working in the shops. Sometimes what matters is the part of the plant that we use, and maybe the time of the year that we're picked. Ginkgo is a great example. We use ginkgo in kind of, let's call it American herbalism. We use ginkgo more the leaf for its antioxidant properties and blood circulation to the brain, protecting the vessel wall. Now in Chinese medicine, I use the nut, and the nut is phlegm resolving for phlegmy asthma. So there are lots of examples of that. I also like the example of antidotes. Ma huang, or ephedra, which got so much bad press, is an herb for asthma, not for weight loss, but for asthma. And the antidote, if you take too much ma huang, you bronchodilate and you have heart palpitations. The antidote is its root. So if you need to get it out of your body, there's the root. Now I always thought if I ever did like a thesis paper, that I would do it on herbs and their antidotes and how they're usually placed right next to each other. Jewelweed, poison ivy, artemisia, poison oak, and to see how they grew next to each other, and how did we figure that out? So what else do you want to know?
All right, why don't you show us some of your stuff closer up?
Let's talk about lily bulbs. These are my friends. All right, so let's talk a little bit about lily bulb. It's actually a food. And years ago, I smoked cigarettes, and when I was getting off them, I used acupuncture and herbs and vitamins to help me with the withdrawal process. And usually when you quit smoking, the mucous membrane of your lungs just tries to expectorate all the the stuff that was in there, the tar, whatnot. And so what you want to do is protect the mucus lining as you're quitting smoking to help expectorate. Now, this is not so much an expectorant, but it is what we would call a lung yin tonic. And so it nourishes the thicker fluids of the lungs. And so what I did for the process is I would make oatmeal, and I would cook lily bulb and wolfberries in my oatmeal to help me through the process. And so we use this in people who have dry lung conditions. I guess I won't put that back in there. What else have we got here? Oh, I could just like go down the line. And now, when I was first studying, the vast amount of memorization was overwhelming, and I cried. I remember I was in the pharmacy and I had tears in my eyes, and a fourth-year student came over to me and said, "Oh, don't worry, it's like a muscle. It'll get stronger and stronger." And she was right. And to remember all these herbs, I made up stories about them, and they became sort of personalities. And so each of these herbs has its own little personality to me and story. But this is an angelica, which does grow here. It's really tall, like 6 feet tall, very pretty. We've traditionally, we've used it, we've candied it and put it in pies and things, like rhubarb angelica is a big traditional cooking combination. But so, has a hollow stem, but this is the root of diuretica angelica. So each variety within is a little different. And this one, it's also called Angelica archangelica. And I remembered it as the wings of the nose because it helps when you have phlegm in the frontal sinuses. So it's great for sinus headache that's created by either inflammation or mucus. They're both fluid conditions. And really the mechanism, how acupuncture and herbal medicine works quite often, is moving fluids around. Fluids where they don't belong or fluids where they should be. And so getting the fluid at the right viscosity and in the right place will allow your body to communicate with itself, to deliver everything that needs to be delivered. But quite often fluid either gets in the way, gets swelling under the tissues, or mucus, or food stagnation, or it's really dry. And that creates its own kind of stuckness because things are too dry for movement. So this is more of a drying herb, where the other was a moistening herb. That one's more for lung, and this is more for sinus. So each herb has sort of a favorite place in the body. Like Huanushi, this you don't see this in Western herb shops, but Huanushi is more strengthening the low body. And so we don't want to generalize and say, well, roots work at the bottom and leaves work at the top and flowers do your head. Mm-hmm. But it's not that far from true. And if you think about it and you want to translate it into constituents, well, there are a lot of minerals in roots, which do a lot of work with elimination and kidneys and that sort of thing, where essential oils and flowers and these sorts of things that hold a lot of fragrance, they do work more in the upper senses, because by the time they actually get into the lower body, they've disintegrated. So there's some very interesting, we call it doctrine of signatures, where herbs that look like what they treat. But I like to think of also things that are vines quite often do pain along arms and legs, and neck and shoulders. So sort of the blood vessel system. Things that have thorns eliminate wind and pain. So wind is a very difficult concept to understand, and realizing that traditionally herbal medicine was taught separate from acupuncture. They are two separate diagnostic paradigms, where the body and acupuncture is a meridian-based diagnosis. You have, let's say, this kind of stagnation, let's call it damp, because we were talking about fluids. Damp stagnation in the gallbladder meridian. Well, that is going to be treated through the meridians. Now, diagnosis with herbal medicine, I don't use the meridians as much. Post, what was that? The uprising in China, when they standardized Chinese medicine, they put them together. And so you will see meridians in herbal medicine, but really that's just a crossover from the acupuncture. But knowing that my diagnosis for you herbally is going to use a different language than the diagnosis I use for you with acupuncture. So it's almost a separate treatment that we do all in one. Most American acupuncturists do that. Chrysanthemum flower that grows here. This we would put, of course, studying in California, we have a different environment. It's hot and dry. And here, it's damp, and just damp. A lot of rain, a lot of growth, a lot of pollen. But dry and hot were the two environmental factors that we had to work with the most in California. So in the waiting room, we would cook up a pot of chrysanthemum tea because it clears heat from the eyes. And you would always know when the Santa Ana winds were coming down from the mountains, because everybody would come in with red, dry eyes and a sore throat. And this was the remedy that we needed. Now, I've talked a lot about the herbs as individuals, but knowing that when you put two herbs together, it creates another entity, that it's called pu yao, or herbal recipes. So the sum of their parts is, or the whole is greater than the sum of their parts.
Okay.
Myrrh.
How you going all day?
She's the Vanna White.
Go ahead.
I know.
Show us your
Oh.
cobwebs and your.
I don't have any.
Oh, you don't have any
Do I have-
cobwebs.
I have a little bit of, well, like the tree resins are the frankincense, the myrrh, the dragon's blood, and they can also be burned as an incense. And actually, their smoke is antimicrobial. So the old way of burning something in a sick room to cleanse it of evil spirits, they were actually right. But this is, I love this. It's called dragon bone. It's actually fossilized bone. It's a high mineral herb that we use, and it does require longer cooking. So I often use pre-prepared formulas, because cooking these, to really optimize the cooking, sometimes we would have to give some of the heavier herbs separately. They'd have to be cooked for 20 minutes and then added to something that's cooked for 10, added to something that's cooked for 3. And so why not let somebody else do that? And it does make your kitchen smell very interesting. This is cattail pollen, which I just love the color of this. If I got into what that does, this is very psychological herb. Clears the mist from the heart. That's very lovely. But the herbs that have already been put together, the companies that I allow on my shelf are all very high efficacy formulas. They cook them the way that they traditionally were meant to be cooked. Some things should be extracted in alcohol. Some things should be extracted in water. Sometimes they'll do both and mix them together to make sure that they've got everything. So this company is in North Carolina, and they do more Western herbs, but it's Gaia herbs I really love. And then right above them is a company in California that does the Chinese formulas. So just depending upon the person, I try and match the formula to them. And every once in a while, I will make a tea if a person would like to cook it.
Fabulous.
Too bad I don't have my cicada skins or earthworms anymore. I got rid of them.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I've drank the bug juice.
People didn't know what to do with the earthworms.
Oh, the earthworms, yeah, they're great for back pain, but they taste awful. They're so bad. And I just thought, who's going to comply?
No.
So, yeah, and they don't stay as good on the shelf as long as some of these other ones. So.
All right.